Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Podcast, now proudly presented by Yahoo Fantasy. I'm John Macri, joined, as always, by PFF's lead fantasy analyst, Nathan Jahnke. Nate, we've been covering player rankings quite a bit, as well as players who we do and don't like at cost, and like comparing them to others in similar ranges. So we kind of figured now it's the time to put that to work here and test like a draft strategy type episode here, since it's fantasy draft season after all. Exciting time of year, obviously. So how you doing? And looking forward to getting in some drafts here in August as we enter August now.
Yeah, doing well. Sad that we're not in studio together like we were last week, but still good to be on the podcast again. We have the Hall of Fame game this week, so that's exciting. Have been juggling several slow fantasy drafts at a time, so having fun remembering who I've picked in what leagues and all that stuff. But it's a fun time of year, and we still have plenty of weeks before the peak of fantasy draft season.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I mean, like it's kind of what we build all off season toward, right? Is fantasy draft season, and then we get into the grind of it once the weeks start, and it's going to sneak up on us pretty quickly here. I think August is going to go by pretty fast, but we'll have plenty of content jam packed throughout the month to help get people ready for fantasy draft season. Because yeah, like you said, there are going to be a ton of fantasy drafts going on, and for this episode specifically, like we said, we're kind of looking at fantasy draft strategy, right? And we're going to utilize Yahoo's ADP to walk through some potential options by round or by pick range, whichever kind of makes the most sense as we work through our discussion here. And then, we'll talk about which players and positions we like in each round or range, or players and positions we don't like, or we'll wait on or attack early, and those kinds of things, and look to kind of rationalize our strategies heading into fantasy drafts this year, but also understanding that, we might not be able to cover every type of draft strat in one episode, and that you guys might have different approaches to your drafts this year. So always feel free to shout out your strategies in the comments as well, because I'd love to hear some different viewpoints on 2025 fantasy drafts other than Nate and I's as well. So let us know. Yeah, before we get into the first picks, Nate, it's probably worth reminding the good people that the NFL season is just weeks away. We've just been talking about it, but again, we cannot stress enough how quickly it's going to come here. And the Hall of Fame game and the preseason are starting very shortly here, which means that fantasy leagues are firing up. Drafts are starting up in earnest. You and I have been prepping for this time for a while now, spending months on 2025 draft prep, so that you guys, the listeners and the readers, can get you prepped and ready and as quickly and easily as possible, because winning season starts now, right? And that starts with PFF Plus. And for just $79.99 for a limited time, that is just $666 a month. That is $40 off. Full access to PFF Plus for the year, so that you guys can dominate leagues and or smash bets from week 1 through the 2026 draft. So for me, getting into PFF Plus here, it's not just the fantasy tools and the betting dashboards and the mashup charts, player grades, all of that, because we know that those are unbeatable tools. It's a major edge. There's no doubt about that. And it's using the same data that NFL teams use to prepare each week as well. But it's also the many articles that we write each week, Nate, that Trevor, Dalton, and Max and our many great talents write here every week, that packs all of that data and info into like contextual pieces that highlight the standout players who, we can identify and help us win our leagues, win some cash, or just be the smartest football mind in the group chat. This is now your chance. So the PFF Plus early bird deal ends August 7th. I can't stress enough how much, people reach out to me about promo codes or sales when it's too late, because they want in on everything that we're pumping out all season long, but especially in season, right? So for those people that want to win, get in on those advantages, like Nate's start sit pieces and rankings, the wide receiver man zone coverage report, IDP fantasy report, IDP rankings as well, and so much more. You can go now to subscribe.pff.com and then use the code earlybird. So that is the code earlybird, one word. Use that and you will save $40 per year. Get in on the action, because like I said, it is for a limited time only. All right, Nate, the good folks are now officially locked in. So let's get this draft strat episode kicked off at the very top of fantasy drafts. Again, for the purpose of this episode, we're using Yahoo's current ADP, but starting right at the top, it's kind of what the question is, what to do if you're presented with the 101 in fantasy drafts this season, because the choice, at least for us, it is between Jamar Chase and Bijan Robinson, right? So for some others, it might be between Chase and Saquon or Bijan and Saquon, but that's not really how we have them ranked. So for the sake of this episode, we'll take Saquon out of the 101 equation and kind of ask, I'll ask you, Nate, what are you doing here with the 101 for fantasy drafts this season?
So I've had Jamar Chase as my 101 basically since January. He has just been so consistent with the Bengals. He's the one wide receiver playing with an elite quarterback. The Bengals kept the offense very similar to last season. A lot of the same players on the offense, same coaching staff. The defense still expected to not be all that great, so the Bengals should be in plenty of shootouts, which helps the offense. But I have been finding myself whenever I have that 101 and picking Chase that I have a hard time getting running backs on my roster that I'm happy with. So while today I still have Chase as my 101, I could very well see myself changing that sometime in the near future to Bijan Robinson. Because if you look at running backs, if you pick Jamar Chase at the 101, then you automatically just miss out on the top 12 or so fantasy running backs by ADP: Saquon Barkley, Bijan Robinson, Gibbs, Derrick Henry, Ashton Jeanty, CMC, Devin A-Chain, Josh Jacobs, Bucky Irving, all gone. Whatever platform you're using, Jonathan Taylor, gone on Yahoo. This is right around the time that Kyron Williams is available. So Chance Williams will be gone by that point as well. So the only running back in the top 12 of my rankings that's still available is Kenneth Walker III, but that is roughly 20 spots earlier than his ADP. So if you pick him with either the 212 or the 301, that is reaching for him a decent amount. That's probably not where you want to be drafting him. The only running backs that you're considering outside of Kyron Williams falling is a guy like Chase Brown or James Cook, which are two decent options around that range. But when you compare that to players at other positions, Drake London, Ladd McConkey, some of the wide receivers who are generally available there, Trey McBride often there at tight end, any of the quarterbacks typically there. So a lot of good players at other positions that you are missing out on if you pick a running back at 212 or 301. So I've been finding myself wanting to either add a wide receiver or McBride or a quarterback with those spots. And then you go the 2 rounds later, you have Taylor definitely off the board, Kyron Williams definitely off the board, James Cook, Chase Brown, Breece Hall, Joe Mixon, Kenneth Walker, Alvin Kamara, and Chuba Hubbard. So that is a lot of the top 20 running backs that we know have a secure spot at the top of their team's depth chart. That leaves Omarion Hampton, which I think is a great value there. That's right around his ADP, so it's not a guarantee he's available there. But definitely if he's available, I'd be picking him. And then really it's only James Conner is the other running back that's right around his ADP. That is a decent enough value there. RJ Harvey is someone that I have ranked there, but again, it's a decent gap between his ADP and getting picked there. So that's not necessarily getting Harvey at the value that you want to get him at. So yeah, I'm happy to get Omarion Hampton with the 4th or 5th pick. But I typically want to end up with 2 running backs with those top 5 picks so I can get 2 of those top running backs that have a secure role. So I've been very heavily considering moving Robinson to the 101. Not anything to do with Chase, just it's a lot easier to get wide receivers in that 2nd or 3rd round, the 4th or 5th round. The 6th round is full of great wide receivers, 7th round full of great wide receivers. So I'm finding it a lot easier to get wide receivers I'm happy with later than it is running backs, specifically from that 101 spot.
Yeah, I literally had the exact same feeling as I was kind of looking through here, and a lot of the same players kind of came to mind, obviously, right? Because you're looking at the ADP, and for me, like I did find that, yeah, if you're going Jamar Chase 101 at ADP, there is a part of me that kind of likes that build as well, right? Because because of how you can use your next few picks, and as long as you're okay kind of fading the running back position as well a little bit. And then as we know, a lot of the times drafts don't go as we plan, but let's assume that the things stay relatively normal based on the ADP, and we can use that kind of as the roadmap for this 101 pick. So if I do go Jamar Chase at 101, I then potentially get a shot at someone like Lamar Jackson at the end of round 2. So now I potentially have my wide receiver 1 and my QB 1, because some of the other options in that range based on the ADP, Drake London, Ladd McConkey, Kyron Williams, Chase Brown, like I don't hate that at all. I just kind of prefer Lamar Jackson there. Then I get to pick again. And the other player in that range, like you said, aside from those two wide receivers and two running backs, is Trey McBride, who I think has a legitimate shot at tight end one. So if I start my draft with, potentially Jamar Chase, Lamar Jackson, Trey McBride, wide receiver one, QB one, tight end one, I do like that part of it. And then the other part of it is that by the next time I pick, I will probably need a running back, right? And there are at least some options in that fourth round. Like there's always the chance that Alvin Kamara or Kenneth Walker fall, and I'll definitely take a Kenneth Walker there. But if not, like you said, Omarion Hampton, who I really like his RB1 potential this season as a rookie. James Conner has been excellent in the past 2 seasons, so can feel good about him as my RB1. Not great, but I do feel like those other positions can help make up for it. And then you can continue to attack the running back position, take some shots a little bit later on. But look, if you like to attack running back early, odds are you're going to go Bijan Robinson or Saquon Barkley at 101, right? And I don't think there's anything wrong with that as well, right? Like you can absolutely build up a nice start at the running back position with your first few picks and then attack like the deeper wide receiver position once you feel good there, because there are some other wide receivers who I think are going to be values going beyond these first 4 rounds or so. So yeah, it's always, whatever floats your boat. But that's kind of my early thought process, at least for if I do have a shot at Jamar Chase at 101, there's, or 102, right? If someone takes that decision away from you, like there are ways around it and ways to kind of hopefully bolster your roster through other positions, which, like I said, with Lamar Jackson or Trey McBride there, you got to hope that those things turn out. But I think there's a path there still to build a really nice roster.
Yeah, and like I said at the start, this has nothing to do with Chase. We are still very confident Chase will be a very good wide receiver this season. It just, like you said, if you draft Chase 101, then you have to be ready to go either hero running back or zero running back and be prepared to spend the rest of your draft doing that strategy.
Yeah, for sure. So, Nate, that's kind of how we're looking at things from the first or potentially second pick of fantasy drafts, but not everybody is going to get a chance to choose from those top 2 options, right? A lot of people are going to be picking in the middle or later part of the first round. And for those sick enough, those of us sick enough, that is, to be in way too many fantasy leagues every year, we'll often get a chance to draft from nearly every spot. So do you find that there is a draft spot that you prefer over others? And maybe that's, just the 101 or 102, but other than those 2, do you feel like you like the middle of the first, 104 to 106, or the end of the first, so that you can kind of get the 1-2 turn there and kind of control your destiny a little bit better by making back-to-back picks? What do you like more right now for 2025 drafts?
Yeah, I've got my general spots ranked, so I'll go over my top one, see if that matches yours, and then we'll go all the way to the bottom. But generally, I am happy with the 2 to 5 pick range. So early first round, not necessarily the 101 because of everything that we just talked about, but that 2 to 5, because there's those clear 5 players by ADP, Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs and Saquon Barkley at running back, and then Chase and Jefferson at wide receiver. They are clearly the 5 ahead of everyone else. And then there's a bunch of guys that you could fight about for the 6th spot. So because it's a clear 5, and even though I'm not as high on Barkley, I know wherever I'm picking in those 5, I don't necessarily have to pick Barkley unless I end up in a spot where Barkley falls to 5, and then I have to make a decision there, which I am not typically finding myself there at 105 with Barkley as the one player left on the board. So it allows me to typically get either Bijan Robinson or Jahmyr Gibbs, either of which I am very happy with. Gibbs, we just saw reports recently that in practice, he's often been getting the first reps when typically those have gone to David Montgomery. So it does look like Gibbs' usage is going to be a little different this year, which should help his fantasy value. And then that gives you a ton of flexibility when it comes to the second round. Like we were talking about, any of those top quarterbacks are available. Trey McBride's available. Wide receivers, A.J. Brown is also there with Drake London and Ladd McConkey. So plenty of options for that second round pick to go along with the running back. Then you're not as stressed about getting a running back like we were talking about earlier. So third round, you can continue getting some of those guys. And if you want a tight end, Trey McBride could still be there. There's still multiple quarterback options. There's still going to be some of the good wide receiver options. So it allows you to get a fairly balanced team. Should be at least a running back available around the 4th or 5th round that you can be happy with, and then can get a bunch of those wide receivers in the middle round. So those builds, when I'm picking either 2nd, 3rd, 4th, or 5th, have been the ones where I have been happiest with so far.
Nice. Yeah, I like that. I like the, that 2nd, 3rd, 4th pick for sure. But for me, like, I think if I can't draft first, like to start drafts, then maybe I want to draft last, because I love the options available from like picks 10 to 12, and then kind of the potential to double up on those guys, or still grab like a legitimate position leading potential superstar as that 2nd pick, right? Like if you're looking at picks 10 to 12, say like it's Ashton Genty, Puka Nacua, Nico Collins. And for me, like that's a really nice start range to choose from. Grabbing one of any of those 3 and then following that up with one of the next 3, which would be like Malik Neighbors. There's Jonathan Taylor and Josh Jacobs there, but for me, I'd move up Brian Thomas Jr. and Devin Achane. BTJ and Achane I put ahead just because of my rankings and how I like those guys. I'm far and away preferring them. So for Achane, I won't get into too much specifics. I just had an article go out this week covering like my dark horse RB1 picks. It'll be my 3rd year of doing that now. And of the previous 6 options that I've written up, 5 of them have delivered at least like top 11 for the year, despite most of them being drafted well outside of that range. So you can see who this year's picks are along with Achane today, but still choosing between like him and Brian Thomas Jr. in that 2nd spot after getting Ashton Genty or Puka Nacua or Nico Collins, and looking at the Yahoo ADP here, I love that potential here. So that could be one of my favorite starts here. And I think all of those guys have legitimate position leading potential for their positions. And then once you get into that 3rd round, so you're waiting a bit, right? You got to be patient and kind of navigate what to do in round 3 and 4 as it's getting closer to you. But looking at this Yahoo ADP, kind of going in that range of like 310 to 403, knowing those are going to be my next picks where they're coming from, I really like kind of zeroing in on like a Garrett Wilson here, which even if I started wide receiver, whether it was, Nico and Puka or Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr., Nico Puka does the 1st pick and then Neighbors or Brian Thomas Jr. as the 2nd pick. Like I still might want Garrett Wilson here. And now it means that I do have to go wide receiver to start the draft. And I'm okay with that. I can maybe make it work, because even my pick after Wilson, it might not be a running back. And so now I'm, putting myself in like a 0 running back strategy, which I'm fine with, because I'm loading up at the wide receiver position. And I wouldn't want to wait too much longer, at least at quarterback. Right. And if I could grab one of those top 5 options, which in this case, probably going to be Joe Burrow. Right. So, if I have Joe Burrow, potentially 3 wide receivers, or a mix of one of the other positions or one of the running back positions in there. But odds are I'm going to try to grab like Genty or Achane with one of those first 2 picks, because like obviously the 0 running back candidates, they aren't amazing. They come with some risk, but there's a world where we can make it work, right? And I'll write an article about that in a couple of weeks. But if you can get the Garrett Wilson, Joe Burrow combo for safety, then I might reach on like, or if you can't get them, then I might reach on like a Kenneth Walker Jr. or Marvin Harrison Jr. Kenneth Walker the third, Marvin Harrison Jr. For like that higher maybe risk upside, but can also reach a little bit for like a Laporta or TJ Hawkinson, because tight end dries up a bit after that as well. And they might not make it to the end of round 5. And I don't really want like a Travis Kelce or a Mark Andrews that early, right? So it's not great value to reach for the tight ends, but it's better than kind of what the options are that you're left with, I find, at the position. Even though I like a lot of those guys as kind of, I like their potential, they come with a lot more risk. So like a Laporta or TJ Hawkinson, if I have to reach, and only if I can't get the Garrett Wilson, Joe Burrow combo there on the turn. So I don't know that, there's other guys, obviously, like you said, but Devontae Smith, Jameson Williams, RJ Harvey are going later. You could get a Justin Fields a little bit later as well from that range. And even pairing him with a Joe Burrow, I like that. Even in like a 1 QB league, just to make sure that you have the upside on your roster and it doesn't go to someone else, right? So And then, yeah, like if you are going to do that and go the zero running back strategy, like there are guys that, start in around round 9, Jordan Mason, Travis Etienne, or Najee Harris, or Cam Scatterbu in round 10, Ramondre Stevenson, J.K. Dobbins, Javonte Williams, maybe in like round 11. But beyond that, you could also go rookie hunting, right? And hope one of those guys hits big, right? Whether it's a Byshal Tootin, Jarquez Hunter, maybe even Blake Corum, who's not a rookie, but still Jaden Blue, or, you could hope on a handcuff as well, like a Rashad White, Braylon Allen, Rico Dowdle. But those are kind of like your true zero running back candidates, in my opinion. But there's ways to make it work, right? But I really found that I'd like that kind of 10 to 12 pick range just to make those back-to-back picks. And I feel like the options going in that range can still get us off to a really nice start, and doubling up on them, I felt pretty good about. So that was kind of my favorite range anyways.
Fair. Yeah, I have that kind of range as my second best option. I don't necessarily like the 12th pick in general as much, but even going a little earlier to 9th or maybe 8th along with the 10th and 11th pick, just because there's that top 15 or 16 or so players, the top 8 wide receivers, top 7 or so running backs, and Brock Bowers. Getting 2 of those players is a very nice strategy. I know you were talking about some of the running backs who are an option. Christian McCaffrey is also available in that range, so I don't think you necessarily need to go zero running back. I think you can get one of those of McCaffrey or Jahnke or HN or potentially even Derrick Henry, and still have a running back you're happy with, or double up at wide receiver. You mentioned the guys that are great there, the Brian Thomas Jr., Nico Collins, Malik Neighbors, plenty of options that you're happy with. I find myself in the 3rd round maybe shying away a little bit at wide receiver because I drafted the 2 or at least 1 in those first rounds, because that's the range where George Kittle's getting drafted. That's the range where Jalen Hurts is getting drafted. So I can at least get a quarterback or a tight end. And then that 4th round, like Omari and Hampton's typically around somewhere around there too. So even if I went wide receiver, and then a tight end or a quarterback, I know I can get Hampton and can get at least one running back I'm happy with. The reason that I kind of shy away from the 12th pick being included in that range is, even though you get 2 of those players that we talked about at the top, I think it's harder to get a tight end or a quarterback if you have the 12th pick, because plenty of the time Kittle is gone by the 312 and Jalen Hurts is gone by the 312. So I'm not as high on getting Joe Burrow right around that range. I think there is a bigger tier gap between Jalen Hurts and Joe Burrow just because of the rushing production. So even though Burrow is also my 5th quarterback, I'm typically not wanting to target him in that range. So I end up with either a running back or wide receiver, or 2 of something in the first 2 rounds. And then once I get to the 3rd round, it's again looking at running back and wide receiver. So when I've had the 12th pick, I've had a harder time getting both a quarterback and a tight end I'm happy with. And then oftentimes spending more later draft picks getting 2 quarterbacks and 2 tight ends, and then not getting as much depth as I'm happy with at running back and wide receiver. So I have the 12th pick overall as like my 3rd favorite option, then the 1st pick overall as my 4th option. And then at the very bottom is right around picks 6 and 7, just because there's the clear top 5 players by ADP, and then there's a bunch of those players that we're talking about getting 2 of, and there's no clear consensus of who should be the 6th player, who should be the 7th player. It feels like any of them is a reach at the 6th pick. So because I feel like I'm not getting the value I want in the 1st round, you can still end up with the team you're happy with. You're just not getting that same early value as you would like. And oftentimes even in the 2nd round, there's that tier break of those top 15 or 16 guys, and then those are all gone. And then you're again looking at reaching a little bit for a player who's typically often found later in the 2nd round that you have to get in the middle of the 2nd round.
Yeah, I'm with you. I have the same kind of feelings for that kind of pick range where it feels like you're forcing it a little bit to make sure you get the team that you like, right? Just because of how the ADP falls. So, like you said, you can make it work, but it just doesn't feel as good, right? So, there's always ways around it. But yeah, I'm with you. I think as far as ranking where those picks are going to be coming from, like which ones I like the best. But yeah, I still love Joe Burrow. I still, like you said, he's still a tier below below like the top 4 there for me. But I still feel really good about it. We'll save it. We'll talk about quarterbacks here in just a second. But I do want to let everybody know again that this episode is brought to you by Yahoo Fantasy. Fantasy football is back. So fire up the group chat, get those draft boards ready, and buckle up for a season filled with breakouts, bust, overreactions, and more. It's all happening with Yahoo Fantasy. This year, Nate and I are playing on Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too, whether you're a first-timer or a veteran making your millionth league. So not just because of the ad that we're reading here today, but it is a good prompt to remind me that one of the reasons that I do like playing on Yahoo, and that's the rating system that they have. Like, it just gives me an extra sense of achievement knowing that I have this diamond rating, like Yahoo's, highest rating on the site, and it just gives me motivation to maintain that status every year. So it's just kind of a nice added touch that you don't really get anywhere else. And now Yahoo, to celebrate 28 years of fantasy greatness, they're adding even more. They are dropping 28 big new features over 28 days, giving you more ways to play, more ways to draft, and more ways to win. And that all begins on August 4th. So I can't wait to see what's next. So stay tuned. Get started by creating or joining a Yahoo Fantasy League today at yahoofantasy.com/PFF. That's yahoofantasy.com/PFF. All right, Nate. So we've both referenced grabbing, quarterbacks relatively early in our examples here of draft walkthroughs. So I guess it is worth talking about if, drafting quarterback early is intentional by either of us, or if we like the late round quarterback strategy. Because to be fair, there are a lot of good quarterback options for fantasy this year. We're at the point where almost all NFL teams have like a legitimate starting quarterback with fantasy potential, almost. But at the very least, there's enough that maybe people will feel more comfortable fading the position. But what's your kind of quarterback strategy heading into 2025 right now, Nate?
So generally the third round is the first time I'm ever considering a quarterback. I know in past years I was open to a second round quarterback if it was Josh Allen in particular, but because Jaden Daniels is the top quarterback on my list and you can get him in the first half of the third round, I'm definitely happy to wait for him then rather than reach for him in the second round. So Daniels is someone that I am pretty consistently considering in that early third round range. And then similarly, Jalen Hurts, someone later in the third round that I am happy to consider. I think he'll have a perfectly fine season, probably a better one than he had last year for fantasy purposes, since I don't expect Saquon Barkley to be able to have as many 15-plus yard touchdown runs. So that should lead to more situations where he's the one scoring touchdowns to end off a drive rather than Barkley scoring those touchdowns. So happy with Hurts there. I'm probably only getting a quarterback in those the third round, maybe half the time, maybe a little less than half the time. So plenty of the time that does mean I'm waiting at quarterback. Like we were just talking about, typically not getting Joe Burrow just because his ADP is so close to those other quarterbacks. So if I really wanted one, I would have gotten one in the third round. Even then, it's like a pretty clear consensus of Patrick Mahomes being the sixth quarterback, Baker Mayfield being the seventh quarterback. Not often getting them. Sometimes if I'm in a 10-team league and I'm more comfortable stacking a bunch of running backs and wide receivers later on, I am finding myself being okay getting Patrick Mahomes at his ADP a little bit in those smaller 10-team leagues. But then also in a smaller league, I'm also more okay just completely punting at the position, because once you get to the smaller and smaller leagues, then you have quarterbacks available on the waiver wire that you could be comfortable starting in the right matchup. So really depends a little bit on your strategy there. But then if I have waited for a quarterback, I'm typically waiting several rounds until right around when Justin Fields is available, right around ADP 90. And then after that, JJ McCarthy, Trevor Lawrence are the guys I like around round 10 or even a little bit later for them sometimes. So those are generally the three quarterbacks. I'm trying to get two of them if I've waited for a quarterback, and haven't had too much problem doing that. Even Brock Purdy, someone sometimes is falling right around where Justin Fields is getting picked. So he is someone I'm generally comfortable with as well. Was top 10 fantasy quarterback each of the past two seasons, even with everything that went on with San Francisco last year. So even though San Francisco right now is having some wide receiver troubles, not all that concerned about Purdy, and could see those troubles lowering Purdy's ADP as we get closer to the season.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I'm with you in that I probably still really want one of those, the big three, right? Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen, Jaden Daniels. You could include Jalen Hurts in there as well. And then for me, like the cutoff, I think starts after Joe Burrow. Like I still like him kind of in that range just for the best passing potential of the group. But if it so happens that, yeah, I can't get one of those three or five because, odds are the reason that that's happening is maybe that there's just too much value falling at other positions and can't help myself but scoop that up, then what I'll probably do is kind of move into like Justin Fields mode, right? Who's kind of going in round 9 on Yahoo right now as the QB9. And I kind of need to make sure that I get him in that range. If I do miss out on the QBs like 1 to 5, I need to aim for maybe the upside of Fields and then kind of pair him with a couple other options who I like later as opposed to, just one backup if I draft like Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen, right? So if it's Fields that I'm taking, then I'm also looking at guys like Kyler Murray, who's going later than him, Caleb Williams, Justin Herbert, CJ Stroud, Jordan Love, like 2 of those 5 in the later rounds for me, like Kyler Murray specifically. I still really like pairing like him and pairing him with Fields at least gives me like 2 decent rushing upside quarterbacks to swap between throughout the season based on matchup and at least try and like knock on the door of that kind of Lamar, Daniels, Allen upside if I could get my lineup set correctly, which let's be honest, isn't much of a guarantee either, but it's at least, a strategy that I'm willing to try here if I miss out on the big names at quarterback. Like if I'm picking, 1 to 3 early on, like I said, I like the Lamar Jackson build that I mentioned earlier. If it's like that kind of middle range, like 4 to 6, Jaden Daniels, Josh Allen, both could be in play there depending on which round you want to target quarterback. 7 to 9 is a little tougher because if you're staying in line with ADP, Jalen Hurts is kind of the early quarterback that makes the most sense. And then 10 to 12 is kind of that Joe Burrow range. So there is like a top 5 quarterback available with kind of each pick range, but obviously a lot's going to depend on how the drafts unfold and stuff like that, which is the case with every draft. They're all different. So, as much as you think you're going to be able to predict how things will unfold, odds are we're going to be wrong and need to, adjust on the fly. But I'm with you in the same kind of way that like there's that kind of middle range of the top 10 quarterbacks that I just kind of leave it because I like the other values at different positions. Like you said, Patrick Mahomes, Baker Mayfield, those are the kinds of guys that I find that I'm not drafting as much because I like to kind of wait if I miss out on one of the top 5 for me, and then try to go for a Justin Fields or something like that later on. But that's kind of how I was looking at the quarterback position.
Yeah. I'll add how crazy it is to think about like when Justin Fields had his injury and we weren't sure exactly how severe it is. And right now it sounds like it's a toe injury. He'll hopefully be fine for the long term. He's already back to doing lots of different things at practice. So hopefully fine. But like that could have completely changed both of our strategies when it comes to this because Fields is that top guy that we're both looking at if we're waiting at quarterback. So like that makes us more prioritize those top quarterbacks would have changed strategies a lot in round 3 of being more wanting those quarterbacks, maybe even consider it late round 2 because their ADPs could have been going up, and then that changes the strategy at all the other positions. So it's crazy to think, and we're going to be talking about tight ends next, and Isaiah likely had his injury that he's going to be out a couple weeks, but hopefully ready for week 1. But if we were told that was a season-ending injury, then all of a sudden Mark Andrews becomes a much more reliable fantasy tight end, makes it easier to find a tight end that you can rely on, changes the complete strategy around tight ends in general, having another tight end in that range that you can rely on rather than having Andrews and likely competing for those same snaps. So crazy to think how all it takes is like injury news for one guy and all of these strategies will end up changing. Like even the Quinshon Judkins likely suspension and not sure when he's going to be back and that stuff. That has changed my perfect draft strategies a decent amount, knowing when you can get a running back that you're happy with in that 20 to 22 range. So having it be harder to get a running back has made me prioritize running backs more early, which is partially why I'd be considering Bijan Robinson 101 is because I can't get or doesn't make sense to get Judkins at the same spot that we were a month ago.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. The injury stuff right now, like, is just it's the worst kind of reminder that, the training camp has started up, because so many players going down already. Like you said, the Isaiah Likely one. I mean, we just literally talked about breakout candidates on the episode last week, and of course, Isaiah Likely was included in there before the news of him injuring his toe and needing surgery and being out 6 weeks. So, it's not as bad as it could have been. He sounds like he's going to be back, but it's still missing a crucial part of the offseason, right? Where he could get more reps with, the starting team and stuff. Like, he got it last year, but you just want these players to at least stay healthy and make it to the season so that we can feel good about drafting him. And then, look, players are going to get hurt in season. There's no way around that. But we at least want to see these guys make it to the season, especially with Justin Fields, who uncomfortably invested already a lot into here. If he was going to miss significant time, that was going to be a major bummer to the start of my season. But luckily, he is back practicing and seems to be okay. So, Nate, that is kind of our way that we're strategizing quarterbacks, at least. And we might find that we'll want to go into drafts with a range where we want to target tight ends as well. And in recent years, the tight end landscape has certainly shifted from a world where Travis Kelce was a first round pick and a perennial lock for the overall tight end one, to back-to-back years of a rookie tight end finishing as the overall tight end one, after kind of this long history of the fantasy community not believing in rookie tight ends for good reason. But Sam Laporta and Brock Bowers, and I guess Kyle Pitts to an extent, have kind of changed that outlook recently. So, as beliefs have changed with fantasy tight ends in general, Nate, do you find yourself leaning toward a specific draft strategy for the position at all, I guess?
Right now, it is very similar to quarterbacks, where I'm either targeting one of those top couple players or waiting at the position. Main difference is at quarterback, there's 4 players. At tight end, there's only 3 at the top for me. Brock Bowers, I'm probably only really considering him at the 201, or if he's falling to that late stages of the second round, which is happening occasionally. But specifically, if I'm picking a late first round pick, so early second round pick, I'm typically not getting Bowers if I think that I can get Kittle late in the third round, since I don't see a huge gap between them, and I am seeing a bigger gap between the running backs or wide receivers that I'm picking in that range. So typically only ever considering Bowers at the 2.01 because of what we talked about earlier. If you have the 12th pick, it's harder to find a quarterback and tight end that you're happy with, because you're missing out on those top 4 quarterbacks and top 3 tight ends if you're not picking Bowers there. After that, McBride, someone I'm very happy with early in the third round, maybe sometimes even late second rounds. And sometimes I'm at a position where I'm like, I know I want to get a tight end and a wide receiver, and there's a couple of wide receiver options, and there's only McBride that I want there. So sometimes I am picking McBride late in the second round, because I know I can get a number of wide receivers that I'm happy with early in the third round. And then Kittle, perfectly happy with a lot of those spots late in the third round. But a lot of those picks that I'm happy to get a tight end are overlapping with those picks that I'm happy to get a quarterback. So I'm tending a little bit to get a tight end early more often than I'm getting a quarterback early. It is decently rare that I'm getting both a quarterback and tight end early. There are some of those spots late second round, early third round, where sometimes I am getting both McBride and Jaden Daniels and then figuring things out from there. But often it's one or the other. And I've tended to lean tight end a little bit more than quarterback, largely because I'm more confident that I can be happy with Justin Fields and JJ McCarthy and Trevor Lawrence starting whoever has the best matchup that week than I am being happy that I can know when to start a tight end, or knowing that the tight ends that I like late are going to break out. Similarly, that like mid-range of tight ends, I'm not getting all that often. Again, in like 10-team leagues, I'm finding I'm more okay with TJ Hawkinson at his ADP, but not as much in bigger leagues where it's harder to get wide receivers and running backs. Barely, I don't know if I'm getting really much of any Sam Laporta, because we both have Hawkinson ahead of Laporta, I believe, and Hawkinson's ADP is a full round later than Laporta. Mm-hmm. So if I'm getting one of those tight ends, it's pretty much always Hawkinson. I have a tight ends to avoid article that includes Kelce and Andrews and Ingram, so not really getting any of them. which really leaves in the around 100 to 130 range by ADP. I'm really trying to get 2 of Tucker Kraft, Dalton Kincaid, Colston Loveland, or Tyler Warren. If I waited for a tight end, and even some of the times if I got one of those top 3 tight ends, I'm like, I'd rather get one of these other tight ends who I think will have trade value later on. And then I can either trade that top 3 tight end that I picked because I'm so happy with how well the other tight end's working out, or just trade the other tight end. And I typically like that better than some of the running backs or wide receivers available in that range. So even though in the past I've advocated if you get a Trey McBride, you probably don't need another tight end, I do think some of these later round tight ends have more value. Of whoever picked Travis Kelce, I don't think is going to be happy with their tight end later. Whoever picked Mark Andrews, I don't think is going to be happy with their tight end later. So I do think there will be teams in your league that will want a tight end sometime in the season. And if you have a good one that you can trade them, it's always a good thing. And excited about Kraft and Kincaid and Loveland and Warren. And I've talked about them before on the show, and we'll talk about them again on the show. So
yeah,
like all 4 of those guys.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, I'm with you. Like, this year is tight at the tight end position, I guess, pun intended, right? Because it feels like that if you don't have, a Bowers, McBride, even Kittle, you're kind of at a significant disadvantage. Like, it's not impossible to get there kind of as the years go on, obviously, but coming out of a fantasy draft and not having Bowers or McBride specifically, like, you're never going to feel amazing about your tight end position. That being said, like, there are other options who can deliver, not the least of which is just, TJ Hawkinson and Sam Laporta, obviously George Kittle as well. Depending on how you feel about kind of the old guard of Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews, maybe you don't hate that. I'm with you, Nate. I'm not looking to draft those guys. But for me, like, I'm most likely to wait even longer once those kind of top 2, really specifically Bowers and McBride, just like you said, are off the board. Like, I'll settle in and kind of start waiting outside the top 100 picks and go after exactly the guys that you mentioned, the Tucker Kraft, Tyler Warren, Dalton Kincaid, because maybe 2 of those 3, because I believe in their potential to lead their respective teams in receiving production this season. And I don't have to pay the Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, Evan Ingram price to get them, right? So, and then maybe, you could throw a dart later at an Isaiah Likely for the potential upside. We talked about him on the breakout episode. And, if he's healthy, and hopefully he will be, then you get a good potential dart throw there. And he should probably start going a little later now because of the injury. He was going 11th to 12th round on Yahoo. Based on the players in that range, I don't feel like I'm missing out on a ton of upside, but you could probably get him a little bit later now if people are scared of the injury. So there's ways to do it, but like, I'm with you. I want to try to get tight end earlier this year, specifically Bowers, McBride, potentially Kittle. But it's tough. I think if I'm not getting one of those guys, then I'm going to throw a couple more darts at those guys who we believe in that have that potential a little bit later on, like you said, Kraft, Warren, Kincaid, whoever it happens to be, the rookies, Colston Loveland, right? So I think we're pretty in line there with the similar strategy at the tight end position.
I'll also add, like, I wouldn't be surprised if in a couple weeks from now we have at least another rookie tight end that we're adding to this list, like Elijah Arroyo with Seattle. Now that Noah Fant's not on the team, if we find out that he is kind of that clear receiving tight end for Seattle, I think there's certainly a chance that he emerges as more of a fantasy option than tight ends in Seattle have in the past. Oronde Gadsden with the Chargers, it's been constant hype around him throughout the offseason since he's been drafted there. I think there's certainly a chance that he can be the receiving tight end for Los Angeles. And Greg Roman's offense has very consistently prioritized the tight end position. We had last year, Will Dissly was a fantasy relevant tight end for a time. Stone Smart was a guy we were talking about off the waiver wire for a time as well, because we know this offense likes to prioritize a tight end. And if he's going to be the best receiving tight end, we could find out more about that tomorrow in the Hall of Fame game, because we know some veterans are sitting, but I don't think Tyler Conklin or Will Dissly were among the tight ends mentioned that are players that won't be playing in the game, even though Herbert won't, the top wide receivers won't. So we might even be more confident about Gadsden in 48 hours from now. So we'll see what happens with some of these other young tight ends, but there could be some other exciting young options too.
Nice. Yeah. Love Gadsden. Would definitely be excited about him if he starts to show some promise. I wrote him up as like a rookie sleeper coming out of the NFL draft, and I'm glad to see that the hype is continuing to build, because I think there's definitely a lot of potential there for him as a receiving tight end as well, and one that you can get for pretty cheap right now as well. So worth throwing these darts at some of these rookies here with the strong receiving profiles. But lastly, Nate, because I feel like this happens in all drafts. There are drafters who target, defense, special team, or kickers earlier than they should, because they like to fill their starting lineup spots. And looking at the Yahoo ADP, we start to see defenses and kickers come off the board in like the 6th and 7th round. And at least me, like personally, I want to caution against this, and I'll get your thoughts on it as well in case it differs. But for me, we're leaving, I think, way too much potential fantasy points on the table by doing this, right? Because even if we do hit on the defense, special team one, or kicker one, we're hitting like fewer than 200 fantasy points in typical scoring, right? And where if we continue to take shots on the players who have that 200 to 300 point upside at quarterback, wide receiver, running back, tight end, we're just leaving way too much on the table by not taking those swings on the players like the Jalen Waddles and Tetra McMillan and DeAndre Swifts or Justin Fields, Chris Olaves of the world. It's just not worth it, in my opinion. Not to mention that even if we can predict who the defense, special team one, or kicker one will be, it's not really a reliable process, right? Talking about defenses in particular, because I talk about the instability of like IDP points year to year all the time. This is the case with defense and special teams as well. Like in fact, it's worse, right? So looking at 2021 to 2024, we're getting a 0.25 year to year correlation of total fantasy points from defense, special teams, with the perfect correlation being a 1.0 for reference. 0.25 is poor. And in fact, it's worse than the most unstable IDP positions like defensive back. So please remember, like, spending early picks on defense, special teams, like defense in particular, is just so unstable year to year, just being that reactive form of fantasy production to what the offenses that they're facing. And that's kind of what dictates their production. We should not feel comfortable in being able to predict that who those defenses are going to be in like the 6th and 7th round of fantasy drafts. For me, I'm just waiting till the end and then grab your favorite at that point. But Nate, like, anything to add for defense or kickers? Do you feel any different about grabbing them before the final rounds? Because I personally kind of hate that.
Yeah, I wouldn't even grab them in the final rounds if you don't have to.
Okay.
Like with kickers, a big part of it is when it comes to quarterbacks or running backs or wide receivers or tight ends, the better you are at doing your thing, the more you're going to be on the field, the more opportunities you're going to get. Kicker has no control over his opportunities outside of the kickers who are great at kicking long field goals, probably a little more likely for the team to be willing to attempt a long field goal. But really, like, if a offense is playing better than usual, they're going to be scoring more touchdowns, then they're not going to be scoring field goals. So there's not even like this range of even though you generally want to get the best kickers or the best kickers on good teams, the best teams score a lot of touchdowns and don't kick a lot of field goals. So it's not even necessarily the best offenses that end up with the best kickers. So it's hard to predict who those kickers are going to be. So there's not that much difference in terms of fantasy points between them. So that's a big part of it. And then defenses, it matters more what offense you're facing than how good your defense is when it comes to fantasy points. So I generally happy to drop my defense each week, pick up a new one. Probably changes that strategy if you're in like a 16 team league where maybe everyone's picking two defenses and there is no defense off the waiver wire. Then I'm becoming a little bit more likely to pick a defense. But in a normal 12 team league right now, I would much rather get some backup running back that I can be decently confident will be a starter if the starting running back gets injured, because there's a chance that over this next month, a running back suffers an injury, and then that running back all of a sudden has a significantly higher ADP, and I would much rather have that on my roster. And then if the starting running back doesn't get hurt, then right before week one, you pick up your kicker, you pick up your defense, you drop those long shot players. But that's my strategy in those last two rounds. If I'm not being forced to pick a kicker and a defense, is look for those situations either at running back, maybe even at quarterback or at tight end, where, I'm probably not having this player on my roster week one if there's no injuries, but there's a chance they are, and then you have them on your roster, and you're at a much better advantage than just picking a kicker and defense, who you'll have at week 1 when you'll be able to pick up someone off the waiver wire, which is basically as good right before week 1 anyway.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. Yeah, just don't spend your early picks on defense or kickers. Like you said, Nate, just takes those swings at those higher upside players or potential handcuffs, and stream the positions later on, right? The defense and kickers. And we have articles in season that you can utilize to find out what the best streaming defenses and kickers are for the week. But yeah, don't go into a draft seeing the top defense on the board and assuming that that's going to be your top defense for the year, because it's just not typically the case. I mean, even look at last year, right? Denver, Minnesota, Green Bay, Houston, those were the top 4 defenses for fantasy. Those were not even close to the top 4 defenses the year before. So much changes based on the offenses that they're facing and personnel and all those kinds of things. So it's not great process to target your defenses and kickers in the 6th and 7th rounds of drafts when there are so many higher upside players available. So don't be that guy. Make sure that you save those positions for last or pick them up off waivers later on. But Nate, I think that's going to do it for us this week. I hope that helps people feel more comfortable heading into their drafts this season. At least gives you guys some stuff to ponder as far as, potential strategies and things like that. So thank you all very much for listening. Nate, thank you to you as well for running through this with me. And before you go, do please let everybody know what you have going on over at pff.com this week.
So like usual, I have roughly 20 articles going out each week around draft strategy, around rankings, around I'll list a top 3 or 5 players. And then we also have the preseason recap starting tomorrow night with the Hall of Fame game recap. And then we'll have plenty more recaps starting next week. And then along with that, with the podcast, we are having a lot more short form videos coming out over this next month as we gear up towards fantasy draft season. A lot more quick hitters and around draft strategy and other lists as well. So I know, John, you'll be having some of those too, but we'll be having plenty of that on the podcast. So definitely, if you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe to the podcast so you can make sure that you are getting all of those episodes.
Yes, sir. Great point. And yeah, as for me, it's Dark Horse week over on pff.com. So my Dark Horse running back 1, QB 1, wide receiver 1, tight end 1 candidate articles will all be coming out this week. I really like these writing these articles and feel good about the picks in there. So as long as they don't get injured before camp, but be sure to check them out and probably, like I said, we'll do some short form videos on those players in the coming weeks as well, if you prefer the video format. And we'll be doing like IDP takeaway preseason videos as well. And Nate is going to be doing some takeaway videos for the NFL preseason most likely as well. So lots of stuff to tune into here in the coming weeks leading into week 1. But that's it for us this week, Nate. Like we said, look out for the short form videos on the YouTube. We'll have one more IDP rankings video to come this week as well. And yeah, we'll get into the Hall of Fame game stuff coming soon, starring Trey Lance on Thursday. So until then, peace out.